Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange and the host, who might be a mysterious stranger watching Batman from afar. Welcome back to Around the Weird, the booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in both Gotham and Metropolis. I think you can guess what I'll be talking about today. It is another Batman comic, one that I've heard about before, but I haven't read through the whole thing. I'll be talking about this Batman Hush by Jeph Loeb and illustrated and artist-sized by Jim Lee and Scott Williams, among other people. As I was saying, I kind of knew about the story before, as I was familiar with the character of Hush from the Batman Arkham video games. So I kind of knew like who he was and his identity and everything about that. I guess this is another plug for the Arkham video games, saying how great they are and how they tell a wonderful story about Batman, one that I've often looked for in the comic books as well. And I can say, yeah, I enjoyed this, and I felt like it was a pretty akin to the Arkham stories. I really liked Batman's journey in this one. It felt more personal, much like Year One in The Long Halloween, than the other stories that I've read about Batman. So I got this from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. I think I'm running out of Batman stories to read from the library, but that's okay because I've started buying comics, and I can't wait to read the ones that I have at my disposal right now, the ones that I recently bought, which include the Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth, and the Death of the Stacys arc from the Spider-Man comics, so that'll be fun to read as well. Just this a little publishing information. This came out in 2002, 2003, shortly before the Infinite Crisis arc. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It was just like a wide scope DC arc about the multiverse, and it was a follow up to the Crisis on Infinite Earths from I think the 70s. So without further ado, let's talk about this. I'll do some summary, some analysis, and we'll move on from there. And I'll also make sure not to spoil the ending, as it is a whodunit story, much like The Long Halloween. But I will talk about the ending in the analysis section, so just be aware of that. So Batman Hush begins with Batman rescuing a hostage from Killer Croc, who is holding this hostage for ransom. This strikes Batman as unusual because usually Killer Croc just eats his victims rather than holding them hostage. So he believes that Croc is working for someone higher up. While the police are, arresting Croc, Catwoman comes in and steals the ransom money and goes to deliver it off to Poison Ivy, who is under her spell. While Batman is chasing her, someone snaps the bat claw, the line on the bat claw, and Batman goes falling down into Crime Alley, where his parents died. And he ends up getting severely injured. Luckily, he's rescued by Huntress and taken back to the Batcave, where Alfred tries his best. Unfortunately, he can't quite fix all of Batman's injuries, so Alfred calls upon an old family friend, Dr. Thomas Elliot, to help do some surgery, and they say it's because of a car accident or something like that. And after helping Bruce Wayne heal, Tommy and Bruce become fast friends again after their long absence. Both of their parents have died when they were younger, so they have that sort of bond going on, and they redevelop their friendship. While trying to figure out who is Croc's, who's pulling Croc's strings, essentially, Killer Croc manages to escape Arkham Asylum, and when Batman is chasing him, someone shoots out the tires on the Batmobile, and he crashes. Luckily, he's able to avoid serious injury, but there's a stranger watching him from afar, a masked, bandaged stranger. Who is this person? It appears that they are a new villain in Batman's Rogues Gallery, and Batman is aware that there's a massive scheme at hand, and he doesn't quite know what's going on there. He manages to talk to Catwoman, and realizes that she was under Poison Ivy's spell, so they track Catwoman back to Metropolis, where they discover that Poison Ivy has Superman under her spell. Batman and Superman fight it out, with Batman having a kryptonite ring, so he gains the advantage. Catwoman manages to trick Superman into thinking that Lois's life is in danger, so he snaps out of the spell and saves Lois, and they're able to take down Poison Ivy together. Although Poison Ivy isn't talking about who's like ordering her around either. But at this time, a stranger is again watching Batman from afar as Ivy is arrested. A little while later, Tommy and Bruce go to the opera. Bruce has brought along Selina Kyle, who is Catwoman. Bruce knows that Selina is Catwoman, but Selina doesn't know that Bruce is Batman. While the opera is going on, Harley Quinn shows up, and there's a big old fight between Batman, Catwoman, and Harley, which results in Harley shooting Catwoman. Unfortunately, Catwoman is able to survive, but Batman tends to her while Harley escapes. Harley stole something from Thomas Elliot, and so he chases her out. And when Batman goes outside, he sees that Thomas Elliot has been shot dead, with the Joker standing beside his body. The Joker asserts that he didn't actually kill Thomas Elliot, but Batman does not believe him and flies into a rage where he attempts to kill the Joker after everything that he's done over the years. Luckily, Jim Gordon is able to stop him and reminds him that if he kills the Joker has essentially proven his point about Batman not being better than everyone else. So they hold a funeral for Tommy, and later on, Nightwing shows up to talk some sense into Batman and get him to stop being secluded and isolating himself. He tells Batman to let Catwoman know about his secret identity, because if he wants to be in a relationship with Catwoman, there's got to be that sense of trust, and he can't be hiding an entire aspect about himself. They also go and stop the Riddler from doing crimes, and Batman notes how it's unusual that the Riddler hasn't been included in this grand scheme that the Riddler seems to be working on his own. Meanwhile, Batman and Catwoman have a conversation, and she seems to accept Bruce's identity when Batman reveals that he is Bruce Wayne, and so their relationship seems to grow stronger at that point. The stranger shows up in Arkham Asylum and frees the Joker, saying that he's been let go on bail. And the stranger takes off their wrappings and reveals himself to be Harvey Dent of all things. And he says that Two-Face is dead and Harvey Dent has returned. He also talks to Jim Gordon about this and seems to make it official. Batman tracks down Ra's al Ghul as he believes that Ra's is in charge of some aspect of this organization. But Ra's notes that someone has been defiling his Lazarus pits, the things that keep him immortal. And so he doesn't really know who's in charge either, but he's going to, hurt them once he finds out. So Batman heads back to Gotham, and while they're Catwoman and Robin have an argument about whether or not Batman can truly trust Catwoman, and Batman breaks up the fight and Catwoman leaves, and it was revealed to be a ruse by Batman and Robin to really be able to track Catwoman and see if she's part of the scheme in some way, whether she knows it or not. Catwoman goes and tracks down Huntress, who is talking in an unusual manner, and it's revealed that she's under the influence of a Scarecrow. And so Scarecrow and Batman have a big fight, and Batman is able to defeat Scarecrow. But then the masked stranger shows up and takes off their wrappings and reveals himself to be Jason Todd. How is this possible? Jason Todd died years ago after being murdered by the Joker. Batman and Jason Todd fight, and Batman notes that it's pretty unusual how Jason Todd is fighting, and he's also not addressing Batman as he actually would. And after defeating this Jason Todd clone, it turns out that it's actually Clayface, who's also part of this larger scheme. Eventually, Batman manages to track down the actual masked, bandaged person. And who are they? Who did they turn out to be? And who is in charge of the larger scheme? That is for you to find out when you read it. I will talk about this in the analysis section, but that is where I will end it right there. In terms of analysis, there's quite a bit to talk about with this story. The first thing is I want to note how this is more of a detective story than the other comics that I've read. I read a Justice League comic that wasn't very good, and it didn't really feature too much of a detective Batman. I also read The Man Who Laughs and Year One, which didn't seem to be too heavily focused on the detective version of Batman. But The Long Halloween and Hush were both stories that involved Batman tracking down a mystery. In The Long Halloween, it was who was the holiday killer, and in this story, it's who is Hush and who is the person at the center of this evil plan to take Batman down. And I really like that aspect of Batman, how he's using his brains over his bronze and trying to figure out who is allied against him. In a lot of ways, this story reminded me of the Nightfall story, a story I haven't read but that I know about, and how Bane sets everyone upon Batman before ultimately breaking the bat. Interesting story. I do want to read that one too. Another thing I really love about this story is how it prominently displays Batman's inner monologue, and talks about so it shows you his regrets, his fears, his anger that he feels, and the love that he feels for others. And you really get a very personal side of Batman, whereas with other stories you have a very wooden kind of Batman, where you see some emotion but not too much. He's often portrayed as a manly man who fights crimes and stifles his emotions, but you don't really get that here. You see that when the Joker apparently kills Thomas Elliot, Batman is very angry and rageful, and he doesn't take responsibility for the Joker originating, but he does take responsibility for not ending his life sooner. And so you really understand the rage and the grief that he feels, and how he's channeling it towards, the beating he's giving Joker and the eventual death that he wants to give Joker. You also get a sense of the love that Batman feels for Selina Kyle, that it's there, but there's something holding him back. And it really sucks that something is holding him back, but you see the potential for a blossoming relationship, and maybe something more once Batman, drops his shield, so to speak. Another interesting aspect of this story is it furthers the relationship of Batman and Joker. Joker shows up for a very small section of the story, but you get a sense that Batman and he have been fighting for a long time, and Batman in some way feels responsible for letting him continue on to hurt his friends, but he also doesn't take responsibility for Joker's origins, and I agree with that. The Joker and Batman both formed out of the corruption of Gotham City, with Batman hoping to take it on and restore order, and Joker really reveling in the corruption and hoping to further it so that he can gain power or something like that. And the question that I raised in The Man Who Laughs, is it the responsible choice to kill the Joker? It pops up here too, where the Joker has killed Thomas Elliot, and Batman realizes that if he continues to let Joker live, he's just going to kill more. There are no consequences for the Joker's actions, and I don't think he'd recognize the consequences if they came up. So that's a big issue at the heart of the story, and I don't think the story successfully answers that question. And I think it's a big problem if it does try to answer that question, because it has implications for criminal justice and capital punishment. And ultimately, I don't think the Batman should be responsible for delivering that sense of justice. But he should absolutely help the police take down the bigger villains of the city. Yeah, I absolutely love how Jeph Loeb tackles this issue in this particular comic. Another thing that I really love about this story is the relationship between Batman and Catwoman. A lot of the comics that I've read before have touched upon the Batman and Catwoman relationship. Not in any meaningful way, though. They just show that they like each other, but they're also at odds against each other. And I feel like that's delved into more here, often because this is a very personal story for Bruce Wayne, where you see his inner monologue. So you get a sense of what he wants, and he really wants that love. Like Bruce keeps himself so distant all the time, and he doesn't want that. He visits Metropolis, and he sees Lois Lane and Superman, and sees the relationship that he has, and he really wants something like that. And he recognizes that Superman lets Lois know his true identity. He lets her in. He gives her that sense of trust. And Batman wants to do the same for Catwoman. But at the very end of the story, he pushes Catwoman away because he can't form that trust. And a lot of the time, you can't trust Catwoman. But this also has to do with the fact that Bruce is a very paranoid person who had a harsh upbringing, and he can't bring himself to love because he's afraid of what he might lose. And even if he were to drop the Batman persona, I'd still think that sense of mistrust would exist because there's that underlying fear that if you love someone, they'll eventually be taken away from you as long as you're living in a terrifying city like Gotham. So I do like the relationship and what it reveals about Bruce Wayne here. Some issues that I had with the story, the first one is what I've noted in previous comics. There's a sense of hypersexualization with the women heroes in the comics, specifically Huntress and Poison Ivy and Catwoman, and it seems obsessively catered to the male gaze, and I can't say anything else about that. Like, it's dumb. I don't know why they were so ready to focus on it in this specific story. There are women comic book readers out there, but there's going to be less of them if you continue to draw female characters in a very sexual, obnoxious kind of way. When they're not intending to be sexual, they're intending to be menacing. And finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the ending. I thought the ending was fine for the most part. It was good because you find out that Thomas Elliot faked his death and has been holding a vendetta against the Waynes because they saved his family when he didn't want them to be saved. And so he wants to take down Bruce Wayne as a measure of vengeance, a sort of a darker reflection of Bruce. It's interesting how he did it. He organized all the villains and managed to create a gauntlet that Bruce almost didn't survive. So I like Hush as a villain there. I wish his character was more fleshed out, but maybe that wasn't possible with the gauntlet format there. But the big problem that I noted is there are too many twists. It turns out that the Riddler organized this whole scheme, and he's not really featured that big in the story. It's like, surprise, the Riddler was at the center of this, and also he used the Lazarus Pit to cure his cancer, which is fine, I guess. It feels like a weird, unnecessary twist. And then there's also the fact that Jason Todd shows up, which I didn't feel really needed to be necessary. It kind of took the air out of a death in the family. With here's Jason Todd, he wasn't supposed to show up, but now he's here. And sure, it's Clayface in disguise, but they use this as a means to further retcon the story in future comic book editions, like the Red Hood. So it's very wonky, and I feel like the story got up its own butt at times in order to psych out the reader, and all it needed to do was tell that simple Thomas Elliot is the villain the whole time story. So it doesn't completely destroy my enjoyment of Hush, but it does kind of confuse me in the end because there's too much happening at once, and not all of it needs to happen. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Batman Hush. I really enjoyed this comic book. I think it's next to The Long Halloween as one of my favorites. Specifically, I like the gauntlet aspect of it, where Batman is fighting many of the villains in his rogues gallery, and also the more personal aspect where you see the internal monologue of Batman and his hopes and feelings and his fears, and how maybe he doesn't feel like he's strong enough to do what he needs to do much of the time. Just wonderful writing on Jeph Loeb's part, and wonderful illustrations as well. I definitely recommend it if you haven't read it already. If you have read it, let me know what you think in the comments. Otherwise, comment on what I said in my review. I would love to hear from you, and we can have a discussion about this interesting comic book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can get Batman Hush out to the masses and more people can find out about this interesting comic book. Follow me on Twitter at AroundTheWeird so that we can talk about comic books and plot twist in comic books. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and silent travels. Hush.